Hey everyone, welcome to GatsbyConf 2022. I'm Kiko, the engineering manager over here at Webstacks, and today we're going to learn how to make a marketer-friendly blueprint for your headless CMS strategy. I'm going to give us a few minutes just to have everyone trickle in. I know there's going to be a few stragglers, so we'll give it a small amount of time there. And I just ask that everyone just saves their questions for the Q&A at the end, preferably. Just go ahead and get my screen set up. All right, I think this looks like the perfect time to begin, so we'll just go ahead and dive right in. Let me know if everybody can just see what we got going on here by giving me a quick thumbs up or just okay in the chat. Cool. So today, what we're going to cover is pretty much everything you need to know on how to create a blueprint for a quick, seamless migration into a headless CMS type of architecture, all while keeping your content editors happy. And we'll also dive into some of the ways that we can implement all the fancy features your team will love, like an optimized and highly reusable asset warehouse, a site that scales, faster builds and deploys, and ultimately a drag and drop based visual editor that makes creating new landing pages as simple and intuitive as possible. So just a little bit about us. Obviously, we are Webstacks. We are located in sunny San Diego and currently have about 50 employees. We were established in 2020, but have been quickly growing. We have made tremendous strides with picking up extremely high caliber clients, partnerships, and just really the thing that I'm most proud about is the fact that we leverage and combine the most and latest, greatest technologies in order to improve our tech stack and ultimately make a true impact on our clients' success. So some of our clients include Calendly, Service Titan, Circle, Roofstock, Scale, Privy, Resi, but the list goes on to Pattern, Retool, Radar, ShopMonkey, one of the projects that I personally played a more key role when I first started off here. As you can see, I wasn't always a software engineering manager here at Webstacks. I started off as a front-end developer specializing in Jamstack apps, but previously I worked at Marriott, UCLA, and had my own self-owned product design group known as Ontier. And some bonus facts, I really love 3D printing. Little sculptures or like parts for like RCs are really kind of my main forte recently. Also love tacos and anything surrounding Web3 like NFTs, just the metaverse in general. But let's just dive right into what everyone came here for. So before we really dive in though, it's kind of important to understand the overall context behind this focus on content editors and why it's important to keep them happy throughout this journey through the migration process. One of the things that I will highlight is the main hesitations or misconceptions, or rather misconceptions rather that prevent most companies from ever making that leap into headless CMS. So if you aren't already sold on Jamstack's kind of amazing community, its performance benefits, or even the idea of making your life all that much easier, then we pretty much just need to understand that content is king. So take a moment to consider really just how much content you ever consume without even visiting a site. Like, how many times have you used Google to find out how to center a div only to just get your answer in the blink of an eye and without ever actually needing to visit that site? So this may come as a surprise to you, but websites are just a way of delivering that content to your visitors. But however, that content is ultimately what drives the success of your clients. But if your content editors aren't happy making that content, don't know how to make that content, or can't do it effectively, then it's all for naught. So some of the main hesitations that content editors have, seeing as they are the primary stakeholders that will control the budget and effectively transfer you to this headless CMS, are not only the fact that it is detached from the website itself. A lot of, for the past 2 decades, a lot of content editors have been used to more WordPress sites where it's visual based and it's more drag and drop, but we've been able to solve that problem, and we'll get into that in just a second. Another one of those issues is the need to understand content models very well. And that is because of the lack of the visual kind of component. Another thing is the need to rebuild on every content change. And that also leads to slow build times and no preview. Again, these are common misconceptions and hesitations, but it's not a problem anymore thanks to the wonderful folks over at Gatsby and the methodologies that me and my team have been able to produce. So let's dive right in. So no longer do you have to really worry about the fact that the site is detached from the website itself. And that not only is because of Gatsby's preview system, but you have to create a comprehensive design system and documentation beforehand, not only when creating certain content models and using helper text, but by collaborating with other departments like design to make sure that every component is documented. There's kind of formulas or outlines in how your client can create these components. And ultimately, they have this information that empowers and enables them to pretty much produce content on their own and not really have to tap you on the shoulder every time they want to make a simple change or schedule content to be published at a certain time. So you can also eliminate the fact that you need to rebuild on every content change, because you can instantly see content changes with Gatsby Preview, which we'll be doing a short walkthrough of in just a moment. But I also want to cover the fact that slow build times are pretty much a thing of the past now. Even with huge 1,000-page sites, Gatsby Preview lets you instantaneously see what content you're editing and how it's going to look in terms of page layout or formatting and what have you. Whereas previously it would have taken up to about 30 minutes or 25 minutes, depending on just how large the site was or if it was multi-language based. But it's also eliminated because of Gatsby Cloud's amazing optimizations that make it pretty much the best way to host any site today. So let's get into that a little bit more by diving into a testimonial from one of our own content creators here at Webstacks. His name is Eric Izazaga, and one of the main hesitations he had, obviously, were some of the things that I covered. Those slow build times, or just making one small tweak that ends up having him wait, 25 minutes just to add a period or bold something or fix a typo. Nowadays, I can actually show you the build time for our current client, ShopMonkey. Any data updates that are done effectively get built and deployed and published in just 2 seconds. And while I did have 8 seconds as the most up-to-date fact yesterday, in just 1 day, Gatsby actually released a new preview feature for paid accounts, and that feature is called and easily enabled on the Gatsby dashboard. If you go into your Gatsby Cloud dashboard, you click on Site Settings. Underneath Preview, and CMS preview builds, you can now enable incremental deploys, which is a beta feature and makes it so that your site is built in just 2 seconds. That's not a lie. We will show the facts. We will show some receipts in just a moment, but let us get to the fact or the biggest challenge, which is the migration itself. And that migration has a few challenges, but if you follow this blueprint right here, there's really not much that you can do to make it any easier or to prevent any of those common pitfalls. So basically, what you're trying to do while migrating the content is keeping your site live, keeping the content safe, which means backing up whenever you can, which means creating separate contentful spaces or environments to do those dry runs or testing on. But if we were to look at this migration blueprint, the pre-migration planning is one of the most important parts that we'll cover in just a second as we transition into a more 3-phase approach that you can tackle migrations with. But here is the little screenshot here, the receipt built in 2 seconds from a data update with Gatsby Cloud using the newest incremental build features. So if we were to continue on here, so ensuring a seamless migration really does mean just crossing those T's and dotting those I's, making sure that you have an exact idea of the kind of scope of work that needs to be completed. You can also speed up this migration. Some migrations are estimated to take around 30 days, but if you leverage a lot of content management system APIs and some clever Python scripting, then you can get it done in just a matter of hours, so long as you effectively do that delivery plan effectively. So that means making sure that your data models actually index correctly to the platform that you're trying to migrate over to. But that is pretty much the least of your worries because of the open source communities behind a lot of these platforms, like Data, which offers its own suite of libraries that takes WordPress blog posts, which are written in HTML or Markdown, and can conveniently convert them all to rich text, which is their version of structured text if you're more familiar with Data rather than contentful. The structured text is pretty much the latest and greatest and most extensible way of writing content today. But we will dive into a little bit how that works in just a second. So in that discovery or planning phase, basically you need to collect and analyze that information. What information do you need to transfer? What is it really shaped like? And is it even possible? So like I mentioned, if you're migrating from WordPress to something like contentful, while doing a lot of research, you may not reveal anything useful. It won't be the first thing that comes up on Stack Overflow, and it won't be the 8th page on Google. Trust me, I've tried. It's very much not the most straightforward process, but again, thankfully, it's just about being clever or using the tools that are around you and resources to the best of your ability. So those content management system APIs, like I mentioned, scripts, or any kinds of automations, and that pretty much takes care of most of the heavy lifting or man hours that would have regularly taken about 30 days to do. But it's more about the discovery and actually the planning phase of getting that going. So this is the data mapping part. So once you've kind of planned out how that migration will be handled, whether you can actually automate it or it's going to be completely manual, moving over blog posts isn't pretty much a clear or straightforward process. Sometimes blog posts will include things that are a little bit more complex, say tweets and YouTube videos or videos that are hosted on very niche CDNs that don't really map onto other platforms as easily as you might expect. But that won't be an issue if you plan out how your content model types will map over to your platform. And again, leverage as many tools or libraries as you can. Data CMS is one of the platforms that I'd like to shout out for offering the most comprehensive tooling available for making that migration easier than ever and converting unsupported formats like HTML and Markdown to those supported formats like rich or structured text. So the last part, if you've discovered and designed everything right, is to simply just execute. You obviously want to make sure that your data is secure. So that means those frequent backups are pretty much pinnacle to moving fast, but doing it at scale. And thankfully, if you were to really pay closer attention or invest a lot of effort into quality assurance or ensuring that you do several dry runs or you do it in sandbox environments, this really lends itself to a great customer experience when they can go back to their engineering team and say that they don't have to worry about really anything for the next month. And by the time the 30-day or 60-day plan is over, they pretty much wake up to a brand new site without really any kind of effort or attention necessary, or worry that their data is being lost or really anything like that. But we'll dive into a little bit about how we implement things here at Webstacks, and more importantly, why we choose Gatsby. So marketing teams are really the people that you're trying to convince, specifically the content editors, to migrate over to something like Gatsby or Headless CMS platform, because they often control the budget for website projects. And naturally, it can be hard to sell these Jamstack sites when what you see is what you get editors that are a lot more visual. It's something that they're really familiar with. And a lot of people just aren't really willing to learn these new technologies. But you can learn how to win them over and keep them happy by enabling a truly great content editing experience on Headless CMS sites using our tried and true strategies here. So you can also choose a Headless CMS using our kind of outline here. We generally go with Gatsby Cloud, but it's really easy to get 100 out of 100 Lighthouse scores on something like Netlify as well, so long as your foundational technology is pretty much up to snuff. So if you have Gatsby, anything or wherever you host it is second to the framework itself. But choosing your Headless CMS really isn't make it or break it in the success of your application. A lot of these platforms like Storybook, one of the newest ones to be released, is really one of the most impressive, or one of the most impressive due to its more visual editing aspect. But Contentful has a thriving, long-standing community. So really, you can go with any one of these, won't matter so much. And a lot of them offer these kinds of advantages here. So you have that SEO support, a lot of turnkey tracking support, and plentiful integrations, especially if you're using Gatsby Cloud with platforms like Contentful. We'll get into a little bit of the developments and advancements that Gatsby has made specifically with Contentful and soon to be Data CMS and other platforms with their content sync or preview functionality that they just keep making surprisingly more and more impressive than ever. So give us 1 second here. Here is just a quick breakdown on our implementation and just how to ensure that everything is seamless. It's pretty natural that most of you will be using version control systems like Git, GitHub, Bitbucket, but it's important that with every build, you keep everyone in the loop. Communication is consistent, clearly defined, and throughout that whole implementation phase, you do everything in a sandbox environment. So you keep data clean, you make edits non-destructively, and you can introduce and test new features, whereas previously you would have had to set up a very exhaustive or time-consuming bootstrap environment when many teams these days looking to build out at scale simply don't have the bandwidth for. So if we were to kind of go on here, we'll get into some of the guardrails that you can also set up within these Headless CMS platforms, not only with documentation like helper text, but validations and required fields that are embedded into the content models themselves, so that content editors, like I mentioned, are not only enabled, but empowered to make content. They can do it quickly and without fear of, not retribution, but without fear of really breaking anything. That's kind of like one of the biggest friction points, and thankfully, really not something that I have to worry about anymore thanks to Gatsby. And that's primarily due to the preview function that we'll cover in just a moment. And here's a little bit more about that. The main benefits of the Gatsby preview feature. If you attended Jack Selwood's amazing talk yesterday, he's one of the project managers at Gatsby. He's an amazingly, wonderfully friendly individual. And here are some of the key highlights there. You're able to conduct final approvals in that sandbox environment by creating preview links that are auto-generated on every single PR or every single introduction of a feature request or change to a style or new page template, for example. That way, content editors can make sure everything looks right. You can have QA tests across different devices, and naturally, it lends itself to a streamlined QA process for very, very easy to test code and really quick smoke tests. So if we were to dive in, we'll go ahead and sign right over to data, and I will show you guys the preview feature in just a moment. So if we were to take a look here, you can actually see that the most recent data update from data was built in just 1 second due to the incremental build feature released just yesterday by the Gatsby team. It's currently in beta, and no, it doesn't work with all sites, but even apart from that, the peak or max time it'll take for data updates like this to actually go through would be no more than 7 to 8 seconds for a site at about 1,000 pages. But with other technologies like Next.js and Contentful, we've still been able to have a lot of success with really, really short build times with 1,500 plus pages on two different languages or regions with a 3-minute build time. Now that's not as quick, but we also weren't using Gatsby and Gatsby Cloud together. So again, another really strong point as to why these two technologies work really, really well together, and why you should actually opt for it. So here is the Gatsby Cloud dashboard, and you can see again that this site was built in literally just 1 second. This was as of today, 10:18 a.m. And again, how you enable that feature is going into your site settings. You go into preview and simply check enable incremental deploys. So that, according to the Gatsby team, reduces build times by about 50%. And if their track record is anything to say about it, 50% in the future just means it's just going to be even more instantaneous. And we'll see how that's pretty much already the case by logging into data and showing you what one of our clients' content editing experience is like. So if we go ahead and enter the project, we'll see that very quickly we can see all of the content types on the side here. We'll go ahead and look at the blog post, for example, and say that you want to make a very, very quick adjustment on the excerpt. So let's say it's available for both iPhone and iPads, and you prefer ampersand instead of ands. All you can do is hit save and click open preview for Gatsby. It kicks off your build, and pretty much in just a few seconds, usually it's actually a lot faster than this, you get a clear and instantaneous preview of how that content's going to look. And if we go into the blog, your whole site has actually been built out. So it's not just the edit on the blog post itself. As you can see, that's reflected in the ampersand here. You can also make automatic preview updates just in the background. So if different teams or different team members are working on the same project, they can make edits, and this little icon here will actually be put on pause, and you'll see the most latest updates in just a matter of seconds. You can also share feedback there or copy this link to conduct those QA run-throughs or smoke tests, like I mentioned, to make sure that content is still being formatted and presented correctly. And how this is implemented is, again, really as simple as going into settings, plugins, and integrating with Gatsby Cloud. So all you need to do is look at your Gatsby Cloud dashboard's content sync URL and the preview instance URL, add it into your plugin here. This is a somewhat outdated plugin. Gatsby Cloud has now built out their own, or the Gatsby team has now built out their own preview functionality, with the main difference being, whereas you previously had to create individual, or you previously had to add this Gatsby preview feature onto every single blog post, now it does it for you automatically across every single content type. So it's pretty much the most turnkey thing in nature. You really just integrate or connect your contentful or Dado instance with Gatsby, and previews are instantly available site-wide. So it's really incredible and impressive how easy and simple it is for you to get up and going with previews. If we were to continue on here, we'll go ahead and dive right into the rest of the presentation here. Allow me just a brief moment. And then this would be the perfect time for everyone to start coming up with any questions that they would like to have me answer or dive a little bit more into. So not only does Gatsby offer this preview function, but they offer a lot more plugins that make this content editing experience really as smooth and seamless as possible. So I would highly encourage you to not only look into what's available, but also look into building out your own if possible. I know that our team is working internally to build out and make a lot of useful UI extensions and plugins that make integrating with Gatsby or other third-party services like tracking scripts or forms pretty much instantaneous and a lot more easy to integrate with your site. Hopefully we can dive into the QA section. So if there's any questions right here. Sorry, if there's any questions, this would be the absolute perfect time to dive right in and start answering this for you. So if you'd like, I'd be more than happy to address anything in the QA tab of the engagement panel there. I got a note that it says I'm not sharing my screen. Is there a part of the presentation that I may have glossed over or overlooked or not have covered? I know I walked through the preview feature, kind of how the Gatsby Cloud dashboard is set up, how we've kind of integrated that with our platform there, but we'll go back and dive right into how we implement that shared screen or that drag and drop editor functionality in just a moment. So if we go ahead and enter the project again, we can look at the actual page templates, commonly landing pages, and take, for example, something like the About Us page. Now, while this looks very simplistic at face value, you can really move and drag and drop any of these components on this page and very quickly see your changes by using that open preview function. But under the hood, this is how it kind of works. Very briefly, I will go ahead and share my Webstorm Editor so that you can see a little bit more on the actual under the hood type of stuff. If you can give me a thumbs up once you see this editor here, you'll see kind of like the bread and butter behind the functionality or the drag and drop editor itself. So as we can see here, this is just your regular page, and this file itself really only fetches all of the pages available on the data CMS that isn't a blog post or a case study, and lets you leverage what we call component generator to map over every one of the components that you have inside of your database or your headless CMS. For example, if you have an accordion component, every new page has a sequence of nodes that are just fetched by this component field. And as we map over them, they are just on the fly generated by this very long switch case that may seem like it adds to performance drag or slows down your website, but it actually doesn't. Again, as you can see, the site builds still in 0.1 seconds, and we haven't really had any kind of complaints with performance or any kind of real technical debt by extending this very large switch statement to handle all of our components found within data CMS itself. And this is pretty much as simple as it can get to enable that drag and drop functionality. So as you can imagine, as a page comes in, it is mapped over through all of its component nodes, and this switch statement just checks if that data CMS response matches anything within our code base, like this feature panel component, and renders out all of the data that's passed in through the props here, like heading or feature. So that is really what's the bread and butter behind something like a drag and drop visual editor, and our bread and butter. And I'm sure there's going to be tons of questions, so we'll go ahead and dive right into the Q&A if it's possible. So someone asked, how much of a lift is it to implement a headless CMS on a Gatsby site that is already built? Need it for blogs that are currently being generated through Markdown and pulled via GraphQL? So great question. I'll go ahead and upvote that. And basically, it's really not much of a lift at all anymore. Thankfully, due to the integrations that I kind of mentioned, Gatsby lets you just go on to Contentful or Dado, go into the plugins section, simply copy your content preview API, your URL, your API keys, and it's really as simple as just hitting save. So connecting your headless CMS to a site, a Gatsby site that's already built, isn't really too hard. It just involves adding it via those API keys, the content sync URLs, and then adding those Contentful-Gatsby plugins or Dado CMS-Gatsby plugins. So anyone who's experienced with it may take no more than about 5 to 10 minutes to actually hook up a headless CMS to a Gatsby site. Now, when you're thinking more so about the actual migration process, like let's say you have about 50 blog posts that are all being generated through Markdown and pulled via GraphQL, it doesn't really matter how you're fetching that data, but actually converting it to something like rich text or structured text is very simple, again, due to those libraries covered or offered by Dado CMS, like Markdown to rich text converter. I can actually show you that library now in just one moment here. Okay. So it's really super quick to find, and there are a lot more packages that you can use here to, will this talk be available to watch later? Yes, it's definitely going to be available to watch later. It'll be recorded, so don't worry about that. I would just maybe defer back to Webstack at some point. Maybe we'll release like a blog post covering this, or one of my amazing colleagues will be able to kind of like follow up with that question in the chat. But as I was saying, these are all of the different libraries or plugins that Dado CMS has been kind enough to offer us that makes a lift like that pretty much easy. Easy as, running the plugin itself. So I got another question that says, is it possible to do code splitting with the components generator with SSR, i.e. one-page template with a possibility of 10 components with 5 pages, and each page using 2 different components? All 10 components are bundled into one file. So you can still do code splitting, and a lot of that is pretty much handled for you. I would need a little bit more clarity on like what the kind of use case is here. So you have one page template of a possibility of 10 components, and there's 5 pages total, each using 2. Yeah, there really wouldn't be any issue if you follow that kind of formula that we have, where it's a component generator and the page template in conjunction with Gatsby's static site or server-side rendering option as well. Basically, that feature is a little bit more out of scope than what we can cover in this presentation, but they do now offer deferred static site generation, and of course, server-side rendering. So it's absolutely possible to still have that drag and drop editor. And we'll go ahead and move on to one of the other questions here. How can you make it simplified at user end once the developer task is done? So just like WordPress, the user can manage it once the development is done. Basically the easiest way that you can make it simplified at the user end is if we were to go into data one more time. You'll see the types of validations or guardrails that we've set up in our application that I've kind of glossed over, be it requirements for a title field or a slug that prevent a lot of the build failures that a lot of users may struggle to debug, or a lot of content editors may complain as a very large friction point. We'll go ahead and look into the blog post itself and see that, or sorry, if I go back really quickly, or into one of our components here, seeing as those are the kinds of things that need a little bit more clarity. If we go into one of these content models, Dado itself is very, very kind in the kind of settings it lets you add, and options like these toggle settings, these very nice helper text, and you can actually extend the sidebar here to add a lot more information or documentation that makes these content models a lot more intuitive. But again, like the helper text really goes a long way in enabling content editors to know exactly how these fields index to a component, and grouping them as well also kind of, takes that second guessing nature away from it as well, because they can see that every field related to media is in this nice media group. All the footer options are neatly tied into this field group as well. And it doesn't really take much to implement apart from going into edit model, going into add new field set, calling it whatever you want, like test. You can really add some helper text here, or a hint, as Dado says. You can make it so that it's collapsible or only displayed collapsed initially. But I would just go ahead and disable that, and you can just drag and drop your different fields into it, and it's automatically updated, and there really isn't much you have to do in the way of changing your GraphQL query or response. So that's really one of the ways that we make it very simple at the user end, apart from making it very much drag and drop, implementing that Gatsby preview, and then adding these kinds of helper text and Loom videos or documentation whenever necessary, if it isn't as intuitive as can be. But again, let's dive into the last question. Which CMS were you mentioning? Data CMS, didn't hear clearly, thanks. Absolutely, I'd be happy to show you here. So the environment that I'm using, unfortunately, is not shown there, but it's just Data CMS. So as you can see here, it's a very, very powerful platform. It's super easy to get started with. However, this same functionality of drag and drop can be implemented across different platforms like Contentful. And I can show you very quickly how that would look on a sample site. So if we were to similarly go to Contentful, and you have a higher budget and can leverage something like Compose, or have access to something like Compose, you can see that we go to homepage, we still have that same drag and drop functionality, but Contentful is more deprecated in the sense that it has a move up, move down option, but it's still very intuitive in the way that you can see how each component will be placed on a page, how the fields itself index the content on said pages, choosing different headings, very simple. But yeah, that's pretty much how you can do it on either Data CMS or Headless CMS like Contentful. The functionality really isn't limited to the platform, but rather, just how clever your engineers are. And I think that answered pretty much every question except how do you make sure components are rendered in the order they are published in Data? Thankfully, that's really just due to the way Data, the response from Data is sent back. It's actually already sent back by default in this order. So a lot of the thinking for you is already done. So if you were to view the About Us page, one more second here. If you were to view the About Us page, the response for components, if we were to look back into the code base here, just one moment. So if we were to take one more look at the component generator, the only thing we're actually doing here is fetching by a page and then asking for components. We're not actually filtering it any type of way. We are not ordering it in any type of way. It's just done automatically based off of the response from Data. And you could adjust that response, but I think it would make it a little bit less intuitive on how those components are actually ordered. If you were to edit that way, which Data does offer, and I can show you how, but again, it would be kind of like an anti-pattern to modify that. If you go into the actual content model on Data itself, if you hit edit model, you hit presentation, and you can see how each of the fields will appear on, or what order the fields or nodes will appear. So that's something that you can edit, but it's not something that you actually have to take care of yourself. It's something that's automatically taken care of for you. Let me see here. I'm just going to look at some of the comments here. We've written a bit about this sort of drag and drop functionality, by the way. Gatsby.js, CMS-driven landing pages. It's quite a popular workflow and great to have you demo it. Right? It was a pleasure to demo it. And if there's any other questions, right now would be an absolute great time to do it. Or if you still have some kind of unknowns or things that are unclear about how we implement these drag and drop functionalities or make this content editor experience as smooth or as quick as we do, feel free to go ahead and ask in the chat or ping me on Twitter. It's Kiko ESTR. But yeah, I'd be happy to answer as well. Again, with any last minute questions or otherwise, I think that would be perfect time to just call it and take a small break or brief intermission. I will still leave the channel open for just a few minutes for any questions, any comments, concerns generally. But feel free to go grab some coffee, take a break, visit some of the other amazing speakers that are walking through some of the amazing features that the Gatsby and Contentful and Data team have been covering. But thank you again so much for joining us here at this GatsbyConf 2022. I hope to see you guys next year and have a lovely rest of your day.